The year was 1833, the year the stars fell. In spring, a group of Osage warriors charged into a Kiowa camp, brutally killing women, children, and the elderly. Prior to the raid, Kiowa bands from all over the plains met at the confluence of Rainy Mountain Creek and the Washita River to hold tribal council and discuss the annual Sundance ceremony. This Sundance was the most religious ceremony of the Plains tribes. An Osage arrow was found on the ground during this meeting, which led to the various Kiowa bands scattering and fleeing from what was their biggest enemy. The Osage had many more warriors and more weapons. The Osage were great warriors as well, but they leaned heavily on their psychological tactics. They would strive to intimidate through actions such as beheadings and visual indications like war paint. Now, the Sundance itself was very important to all the Kiowa bands as they would come together to reaffirm their basic beliefs about the supernatural and the universe. It was essentially an unspoken agreement that all bands would reunite before the ceremony. Chief Islandman's group departed the creek and traveled southwest to flee, but also to locate good grazing land and water. Over time, the Kiowas made a loop of sorts, heading southeast first here to Eagle Heart Springs, then over to Saddle Mountain Creek before heading west again to what is known today as Cutthroat Gap. This gap, or valley, resides between the mountains we know today as Haley Peak and Baker Peak, next to Tai-me Spring. They decided to stop here thinking they were hidden safe and set their camp up. Noticeably missing from this camp were majority of the Kiowa warriors as they were off bison hunting. What the Kiowa didn't know is that they had been followed by a band of Osage from Three Forks that were nearby hunting bison as well. They wanted the Kiowa's horses and had stalked Islandman's band ever since they had departed the meeting. A young boy was outside of the camp grazing his family's horses when he spotted an Osage warrior hiding behind some rocks. He raced back to the camp to alert the others, but the Osage, led by Cheetah, began to attack. The Kiowas were caught completely off guard. They were outnumbered and disorganized. Most of them attempted to escape, running in different directions. Absolute chaos set in as women struggled to locate their babies. The Osage warriors thundered into the camp, taking every life they could. Women, children, even the elderly. They decapitated victims and burned down teepees. One elderly man did manage to escape and reach a nearby camp, hoping to seek relief and reinforcements for what was taking place in Islandman's struggling camp. When the Kiowa warriors returned to the camp, they returned to decapitated and mutilated bodies strewn all over the camp, all slaughtered by the Osage. Some victims' heads were found in brass cooking pots, such as the one here on display at the Fort Sill National Historic Landmark Museum. The Osage had also taken the sacred Tai-me medicine bundle that was an integral part of the Sundance, and even a pair of siblings, a boy named Thunder and his sister White Weasel. Because of the stolen medicine bundle, the Kiowa couldn't perform the Sundance ceremony. The Tai-me bundle was a central figure of the Kiowa Sundance. The Kiowas would make offerings to Tai-me for good luck, and the bundle was safeguarded by a Kiowa who made sure it never saw the sun outside of the Sundance. It was considered foundational to Kiowa culture and life. After the massacre, Islandman was greatly dishonored for allowing the tribe to be surprised and mercilessly attacked. He was replaced by Chief Tou-ha-san, who ended up leading the tribe as principal chief of the Kiowa people until his death along the Cimarron River years later. He refused to be pacified by the U.S. government, and as a result of this, the Kiowas were one of the last to surrender. The massacre prompted the Dragoon Expedition of Western Oklahoma in 1834 by Colonel Henry Dodge, who was also accompanied by First Lieutenant Jefferson Davis. Tou-ha-san was there to greet the colonel and his expedition. The overall purpose of this expedition was to end the ferocious fighting between the various Plains tribes. Treaties were signed, but it did very little to slow raids or intertribal fighting. The Osage eventually decided they needed to make peace with the Kiowa. They took White Weasel back as a peace offering during the First Dragoon Expedition of 1834. Unfortunately, her brother Thunder had passed away while in captivity. Relations did improve greatly after she was returned, and the Kiowas even obtained their sacred Tai-me bundle in exchange for a horse. Afterwards, hostilities greatly lessened between the two tribes. During the winters, Tou-ha-san and the Kiowas lived here in Palo Duro Canyon and along the Canadian River. He was involved in various battles over the years, including leading the first attack at Adobe Walls in 1864 with Sitting Bear, Lone Wolf, and White Bear. You can learn more about this battle in my Empire of the Summer Moon video that I uploaded a couple of months back. There were specific rules put into treaties made with the Plains tribes that were forcefully relocated to Oklahoma in the 1860s. The treaties required the federal government to build boarding schools and provide instruction for a couple of decades. The Kiowas signed the Medicine Lodge Creek Treaty in 1867, but they didn't get their promised school until over 25 years later. In 1893, the Rainy Mountain Boarding School opened here south of Godibo on the Kiowa Comanche Apache Reservation. This was your typical boarding school that was set up on the reservation to try and assimilate the Native Americans into the world of the white man. Most of the time, these schools pushed hard to separate the Native Americans from their language, customs, and sometimes families, also while giving them a subpar education. Boys and girls were almost completely separated, traditional long braids were cut off, uniforms were used, and the Kiowa language was strictly forbidden. In my opinion, this was more about elimination of Native American culture than it was about assimilation. The school had an average enrollment of 130 and was open until 1920, when it closed and was abandoned. Cutthroat Gap used to be a popular place for the Kiowa to camp, but after the massacre, they never used it again. Some even believe the spirits of the victims still wander around the area and can be heard. Now, I pulled a lot of information from various libraries and such, but I also read 2 outstanding books pictured here. I will be working on more videos soon where I actually speak with descendants on both sides of the massacre. So, to be continued.